Hello, welcome to today's yoga class. We're going to start off finding a comfortable seated position, drawing the flesh out from under the sit bones, reaching the sit bones back. What we're really trying to do is to rotate the pelvis forward so that our low back isn't collapsed. Think about taking your sternum forward and lifting it up and drawing the navel or the low back forward. And then firm up the abdomen, broaden through the shoulders, then let go of 90% of the effort without collapsing. So maintaining that posture but with less and less effort, floating into the posture. See if you can take the breath into the lower abdomen or into the low back or upper back. See if you can keep the chest fairly passive as you breathe in and as you breathe out. So today's class we're going to explore a little trick for staying present, for staying focused, for staying conscious, for staying engaged with any process, including our yoga practice. And one way to think about it is staying in a constant state of uncertainty. So most of us resist that state. Most of us feel uncomfortable with not knowing. And so at the first opportunity, we seize on the first solution that comes across our field of vision. We grab it, and that gives us an excuse to stop thinking, to stop paying attention, to stop looking, asking questions, because we already know the answer. We can move on. That's fine when it's important to move on, and there are times when that's true. But in our yoga practice, quite often we don't want to move on. We want to drop in deeper. So we stay in this state of inquiry. It helps us. So we're going to start with just the neck, and we're going to ask a simple question of ourselves as we move the neck into position, creating a little bit of a stretch in one side of the neck. You're going to back away from the stretch until you know that you can't feel anything. Okay, so that's one edge. Then you're going to lean back in until you know that you can feel something. And the space we're interested in is in between there, where you aren't certain. Where if someone says, "Can you feel that?" you say, "Well, I think I can, but I'm not quite sure." And then you pay attention. And at some point you may realize, "No, I don't feel it." Then go deeper until you aren't sure. Or you may realize, "Yes, I can definitely feel something." Back off until you aren't sure. Okay? So let's try that just with the neck and shoulders. Lower your head at an angle to one side. Take the opposite shoulder back and down slightly. And then create not a big stretch, but a very small stretch. Then begin to back away until you aren't sure. Keep asking yourself that same question. Can you feel anything? If the answer is yes, back off. If the answer is no, go deeper. And you can do this in 2 dimensions, simply lowering the head over or backing off again, but we're going to do it in 3 dimensions. So occasionally move your head around from one side to the opposite side, and the entire time asking yourself that same question. And if the answer is yes, backing off. If the answer is no, lowering the head into a little bit deeper position. As you're doing this, begin relaxing your face. Forehead, eyebrows, eyelids, the eyeballs, the space behind the eyes, the jaws, the lips, the tongue, the mouth. Stretch the exhale into a sigh. If the mind wanders, come back to the simple exercise. Exploring the space between knowing and not knowing. The more you relax your face as you do this, the more the neck and shoulders will also begin relaxing. So keep coming back to the tongue, the tip of the tongue, the belly of the tongue, the root of the tongue. Are your teeth touching? Release the bottom jaw, hanging slack jaw. 5 or 10 more breaths. Now begin, as you continue, to look for where you find pleasure. Not a big stretch, but a sensation that feels pleasant. An organic pleasure, not an intellectual pleasure in making progress, but a simple pleasure of sensation. Three or four more breaths. Now begin to, as you continue with the neck, begin to play with the opposite shoulder, moving the shoulder blade around, letting the shoulder blade draw the shoulder around, and again, trying not to strain or even stretch, but trying to create interesting, subtle, pleasant sensations in the neck and the shoulders, and move those sensations around, occasionally switching sides. Feeling the connection between the shoulder and the head, and how those two combined create sensation in the neck. Take a breath or two. And coming back to center. Now just the shoulders. Lift the shoulders up, draw them back, and then try to move not as much from the shoulders, but from the shoulder blades. Try to feel the shoulder blades draw into the spine and down the back. Allow the shoulders to follow the shoulder blades in a big circle. Reverse directions. And now alternate, taking the shoulders up and back, and then up and forward, down and back. And then coming back to center, a little figure 8 or infinity sign with the tip of your nose. And sitting quietly for a few moments. So you can use this technique with a variety of different ways in our yoga practice. Now we'll take a look at how to use it with Ujjayi breathing. So for Ujjayi breath, it's done by half closing the glottis at the back of the throat. If you haven't done this before, it's actually much easier than it sounds. Make an aspiration, open your mouth and say ah, but without the vocalization. Just a ha sound in the back of the throat. Now see if you can make it as you breathe in. Breathing out and in. Okay, now, If you are not congested, close the mouth and breathe through the nose, and rather than hearing it at the tip of the nose, try to hear the sound in the back of the throat. It doesn't have to be loud, just loud enough for you to hear. Now do it with less effort. So now when we apply this idea of playing with uncertainty, one way we can do that with our breathing is with the sound of the Ujjayi breath. So as you breathe in and as you breathe out, the question you ask is, can I hear the Ujjayi breath? If the answer is no, make it louder. If the answer is yes, make it more subtle. And see if you can find some space in between where you aren't sure. Remember, the moment you leap to certainty, the mind has nothing to hold it there, and it'll start to wander. So we want to stay in that space in between. So closing your eyes, sitting tall, broadening through the shoulders, opening the heart, engaging a delicate Ujjayi breath. Start off by making it just loud enough that you can hear it easily. Then see if you can still practice it. Don't stop the Ujjayi breath, but make it more and more subtle until you know that you can't hear it anymore. And then make it just loud enough that you aren't sure if you can hear it or if you're imagining it. If your mind wanders, come back to this exercise. And you can do this as a seated meditation, but we'll practice it on and off through the class in conjunction with asana. So maintaining this idea of the delicate Ujjayi breath, even as you're practicing your yoga. Starting with a twist, lift the right shoulder, draw the right shoulder around and down, cross the left hand over the right knee, lift, expand, broaden, rotate. Bring your attention back to the breathing. For 3 or 4 breaths, playing with this uncertainty, with the Ujjayi breath. And then a couple of deep breaths now. Focus on the sensation of breathing and try and breathe and rotate in the way that feels best. Oh. One more breath. Coming back to center. Coming back to the Ujjayi breath. Finding the space of uncertainty and taking that with you into your twist. Lift the left shoulder, roll it around, back and down. Cross the right hand over the opposite knee. Lift, rotate, and breathe. Five or 6 or 7 more breaths, focusing on Ujjayi breathing with uncertainty. Then shift your attention and begin focusing on breathing in a way that feels good and twisting in a way that maximizes any pleasant sensations. Coming back to center, circling with the ribs, and reversing. Rolling out the shoulders. So we can also use this idea to stay engaged and to help us with our entry into a stretch. So we'll work with a half bound, seated forward bend. First come into staff, reach the sit bones back, draw the flesh out, reach the heels forward. Draw the navel forward, lift the chest up, roll the shoulders back and down. Take a few breaths here and try to kind of push into the pose a little bit, but with an open, expansive prana, energetic field, keeping the breath moving, consciousness expanding. One more breath. Bend the left knee. Bring the heel in close to the groin. Now when we do this, our torso and our sacrum ends up pointing right between the two knees. And we're going to be leaning out over the right leg. So to get the correct alignment, we're going to just keep our pelvis and our sacrum where it is and move the legs. So move the left foot to the left, move the right leg to the left. And now your left leg and your sacrum should be facing in the same direction. Now, we're going to look for a stretch in the hamstring. If you already have a stretch, or if there's any stretch in the back of the knee at any time, bend your knee enough that any sensation moves into this area here and stays out of this area in the back of the knee. If your hamstrings are healthy and flexible, and it feels better to keep the legs straight, that is fine as well. Now, lift, and then leaning forward just a little bit, and then the question to ask is, do you feel a stretch in the hamstrings? If you do, back off. If you don't, lean forward. If you aren't sure, just relax and keep paying attention until you are sure. And if what you are sure about is that you can't feel anything, you go deeper, and if you can feel it, you back off, and then you wait until you're sure. Remember, the purpose of this exercise is to teach you to pay more attention, so keep coming back to that question and then paying attention in order to answer it, really focusing. Can you feel it? The more you pay attention, the more likely you'll be able to start to feel, to notice things that perhaps before you didn't notice. Couple more breaths. Now, as we lean in for a little bit deeper stretch, we need a different question. So now the question is, if there's a perfect amount of stretching, am I stretching too much or a little too lightly? If you aren't sure, keep paying attention until you are, and then either back off or lean in. Three or four more breaths on the first side. Looking for the ideal stretch now. This is a moving target. As the muscles relax or contract, what is ideal changes. So keep coming back to that question. Take another breath or two. and then releasing. Straighten the left leg. Bring the right heel in. Notice that your sacrum now is pointing directly between the knees. Move your left foot to the left, or your right foot to the right. Move your left leg in front of you. Lift, extend, again the knee bent or straight, depending on what works for you. And come back to our first question. Can you feel any stretch in the target area? And if the answer is no, lean in. If the answer is yes, back away. Until you find some space of uncertainty, and then hold there and pay more attention until you can answer the question. And then adjust accordingly. Two or three more breaths. And then shifting to the second question, is this the perfect stretch, or are you in too shallow or too deep? If you aren't sure, hold where you are and pay attention until you can answer that question, then adjust. Four or five more breaths. And then coming back out. Straighten both legs. And then bounce. The knees up and down. Roll the feet side to side. And then coming back into Dandasana. Draw the flesh out. Reach the heels forward. Reach the sit bones back. Lengthen the back of your legs. Now for those of you with tight hamstrings, it's going to be impossible to straighten the legs and straighten the back. So if you have to choose, much better, keep the knees bent and keep the back straight. So as you need to, lift up. Now with the knees bent, there'll be a tendency for the knees to fall apart. So it'll require you actively pulling your knees towards each other. And then we can work the same muscles and get the same benefits with the knees bent. Bring your belly forward, lift your chest up, roll the shoulders back and down, chest forward and up. Now those of you whose hamstrings permit it, you're welcome to straighten the legs a little bit or all the way, as long as you don't lose this nice S-curve in the spine. Now this is a pose not to hang out in, but this is a pose to work in. So leaning in for 3 or 4 more breaths, lifting, broadening, breathing. One more breath. Now shift your weight over to one hip. Place your hand on the floor in front of you. And then just lift your legs, swing them around behind you. Coming around to your hands and knees. Cat-cow. Start each movement from the tailbone. Finish with the head. And come back to neutral. So now engaging the Ujjayi breath and playing with uncertainty in the sound of the breathing. Now do cat-cow as you're practicing this, but let the breath set the speed for you. Keep paying attention to the Ujjayi breath. If you can't hear it, make it louder. If you can, make it more subtle. And then back to neutral. We'll add a leg lift. Starting with the left leg, float the left leg back and up. Reach the chest forward. And then if you want to lift the right arm as well, that's fine. 2 or 3 breaths. Try not to struggle. Just lift up enough that it feels like a healthy, pleasant contraction. 1 more breath. Set the hand and knee down. A couple of cat-cows. Switch sides. Right leg. And then left arm if you feel steady. Take a breath or 2. Going back to table and cat-cow. Extended child's pose. Take the knees wider. Sink your hips back a little bit. Walk your hands forward. And then lower your forehead towards the floor. Find a comfortable position that you can relax into. And then breathe into this position. Breathing deep and coming back to the Ujjayi breath. Make the Ujjayi breath uncertain in terms of whether you're actually doing it or not, or whether you can hear it or not. And as you practice that, see if you can make your breath deeper, more full, greater volume of air coming in and out, but without actually hearing the Ujjayi breath and without actually not hearing it. Take a few more breaths. And then coming back up. Coming back to Dandasana. Make sure you have some space behind you so you can lay back in a few minutes. Again, drawing the flesh back, tilting the pelvis forward. Now, see if you can engage your quadriceps, but using the same idea, and we're trying to lift the kneecap, pull up on the kneecap, tighten up this muscle. But I want you to see if you can initially find that uncertainty. If you know that the muscle's not engaged, see if you can engage it. If you know it is engaged, see if you can let it go. And we're looking for some space in between where you aren't sure whether the muscle's engaging or not. And then focus on the opposite leg. Let that leg go completely flaccid and focus on the second side. Can you engage the quadriceps? And if you're new and don't have a lot of consciousness of this muscle, this will be almost impossible. It'll either be flaccid or gripping, but we want to try and find some space in between. So engaging, if you know you're engaged, softening, softening, softening. If you know the muscle's not engaged, tightening. And see if you can find that space where you aren't sure. Go back. So start off on the first leg with that same exercise. See if you can find the space where you aren't sure whether you're engaging or not. Then gradually strengthen the engagement until you really are engaged. And then see if you can begin to lift the leg without leaning back with the torso. Keep your chest moving forward and up as you start to lift the leg. Now, you may not get off the ground, that's fine. Now, there'll be a tendency to cramp. So if you start to cramp, bounce, roll, massage if you need to. And then try the second side. Start off with the most subtle contraction, then gradually deepen the contraction until the muscle's fully engaged, and then think about lifting. And again, you won't lift high. Keep taking your chest forward and up as you lift the quad. Take a breath or two. At any point, come down, especially if you start to feel a cramp coming on. When you're finished, bounce and roll. Massage if you need to. Now we're going to stretch the quadriceps. So we're going to first lean to the left. And when the weight is on your left hip, take your right foot back and bring the heel in close to your hip. And ideally the foot points straight back as opposed to turning out to the side. Now for some of you that may cause some discomfort in the ankle. So folded blanket underneath the instep to take weight off of the toes, or take some of the weight off. We don't want to eliminate this stretch in the foot, so don't use more blanket than you need to. If, however, you don't need a blanket, just set it to one side. See if you can spread the toes. Pull the little toe in, or out rather, the big toe in, and then spread the toes. Try to keep the ankle in. And we're looking for a healthy, pleasant stretch in the quadriceps. If you feel the sensation move down towards the knee, that's not good. We want to feel the action in the belly of the muscle. So if you start to feel it intensifying, moving down closer to the knee, adjust, reposition, maybe even roll out of the pose a little bit, rolling to your left to release that. On the other hand, if it feels too easy, we can begin to work our way deeper. So start by creating the most delicate stretch. Back away, and you can lift your right hip up and roll a little bit to your left until the stretch disappears. Now, as you come into it, stop before you feel the stretch. And then ask yourself, if you pay attention, does the stretch slowly make itself known to you, or is there no stretch there? And then either back off or go deeper. We're looking for where you aren't sure if you feel a stretch in the quadricep or not. We'll hold there for a few breaths, then we'll begin to work deeper. Plenty of time to get a big stretch, so don't rush. Couple more breaths. You're looking for the most delicate stretching sensation that you aren't even sure you can feel anything. On a scale of 1 to 10, we'll call this a 1. 10 being a big stretch. See if you can now go from 1 to 2. Don't measure 2 by how far you lean back. Measure 2 by what you're feeling. At 2, you should be able to feel the stretch, but only if you're paying attention. Now smoothly go to 3. 3, you're feeling a stretch where even if you weren't paying attention, you'd still be able to feel it, although it's very subtle. Now on your own, if it feels good, you're welcome to slowly, smoothly work your way back to a 6 or a 7. We're going to be doing another quadricep stretch in a few minutes. We're just trying to wake up the muscle, not terrorize it. If you overdo this, the next quad stretch is going to be more difficult, not easier. If this is still too easy, you can drop to your left shoulder. If that's too easy, you can drop to your right shoulder. You get into trouble, come back up as far as you need to be safe and comfortable. 3 or 4 more breaths. Stretch the exhale. One more breath. And then roll your hips to the left, release the right leg. And then roll your hips to the right, take the left leg back. Bring the heel in close to the hip, spread the toes. And starting off with the same idea. Can you create the most subtle stretch in the quadricep? If it's intense, lean forward and to your right, letting that hip come through. If it's too easy, slowly begin to roll the left hip back and down. Three or 4 more breaths at the most subtle level, thinking of this as meditation. On a scale of 1 to 10, go from a 1 to a 2. Remember, the sensation should be in the belly of the muscle, not in the tendons running into the knee or into the hip. Here you should feel it if you're paying attention, but if you aren't, you might not notice it at all. Now leaning into a 3, where you can feel it, but it's very delicate. But where the sensation is finding you. Stretch the exhale. Stay here as long as you want to. If you decide you need more stretch, slowly begin to work your way back to your right elbow or to your right shoulder, or rolling flat on the floor with your shoulders. 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 more breaths. Breathing deep into the belly. Stretching the exhale. Couple more breaths. And then roll your hips to the right. Release the left leg. And then come back to Dandasana and bounce and roll. Coming to your hands and knees, couple of cat-cows. And back to neutral. Tuck the toes, walk the hands in close to your knees. Lift the knees, walk your hands in, and either support weight with your hands on your thighs, or if you feel better, you can lean into a deeper stretch. If your low back feels vulnerable or your hamstrings are a little tight, coming up to this position, knees bent a little, hands supporting some weight. Then to get the stretch, lift the tailbone, sink the belly. Bend the left knee a little more. Stretch the right leg. Bend the right knee more. Stretch the left leg. Go side to side. Coming back to center, leaning into a deeper stretch, lifting the tailbone, rotating the pelvis. And then, when you're ready, roll back up to standing, letting your knees buckle as you pass the halfway point. Next, we'll take a few moments to pandiculate and stretch. Float the arms out and overhead, and then stretching as if you were just waking up in bed, yawning, stretching without thinking. Pandiculation is an emergent phenomenon, more instinctive, intuitive, so with less thinking, more feeling, moving sensation through the fascia, and yawning. Rolling out the shoulders. And next we'll be moving into a Vinny Yoga Sun Salutation. Float the arms overhead on the inhale. And on the exhale, reach the hips back and place your hands on your thighs. Flat back, lift the tailbone. Then bend the knees, roll up and stretch overhead as you breathe in. And repeat, reaching the hips back and letting your hands catch and support some of your weight on your legs. Remember to bend the knees as you roll back up. With each repetition, If it feels okay, you can begin to lean a little deeper into the forward bends. However, if you have any hamstring issues or low back issues, you might want to continue just to come down part way. Coordinate the movement with the rhythm of your breathing. As you warm up, begin to work the overhead stretch a little more firmly. Getting more action by firming the abdomen, lifting the chest forward and up, taking the shoulder blades back and down. Now add a side stretch. Lift the left heel, flare the right rib cage. Lift the right heel, flare the left rib cage. Go side to side. And then finish with a forward bend. Place your hands on your thighs, supporting some of your weight. The back is straight, the knees slightly bent. Either stay there or, if it feels better, release into a full forward bend. Take a few breaths here. And then roll back up, letting the knees bend as you come back up. Stepping your feet apart for Trikonasana, triangle pose. We'll rotate, turning the left foot out, the right foot in. Shift your hips to the left, tilt the pelvis, lengthen the lower rib cage. See if you can spiral the right leg if you know how. Try not to collapse the lower rib cage. Keep the left side of the rib cage nice and long. And then focus in on breathing. And if you want to come back to the Ujjayi breath and finding that space of uncertainty between hearing and not hearing, the sound of your own breath. Use the sound of the breath to create a stillness in the mind and a steadiness in the pose. When you're ready, rotate to the opposite side. Turn the right foot out, turn the left foot in. Shift your hips to the right, tilt the pelvis, lengthening through the right side of the rib cage. Draw the shoulder blades together and down. If you feel any strain in the back of the right knee, keep the right knee bent ever so slightly. If your mind has wandered, come back to the sound of your breathing and then adjust, finding that space of uncertainty in the sound of your breath. Placing your attention on the sound of the Ujjayi breath. Then coming up and out, turning both feet slightly pigeon-toed, releasing into a forward bend. Sway a little left, a little right, and then walk your feet in a little closer, wider than the hips, but not too wide. Interlace your fingers behind your hips, and then float your hands up off your hips. Roll the shoulders together, opening the chest with the chest opening pose, and then breathing with a nice deep complete breath. Lifting your hands up off the hips towards the ceiling or even out over the head, depending on how flexible you are. When you're finished, release your arms, hang into a forward bend, walk the feet closer together. Take a breath or two. and then rolling back up to standing. Next, we're going to be working on strengthening quadriceps, and we'll be doing a series of poses where we utilize a wall. And for this pose, you're going to stand with your back flat against the wall. You're going to walk your feet away from the wall and bend your knees. And in the final position, your knees are directly above the heels. If this is too challenging, bring your feet in closer to the wall and don't bend the knees as much. Now, the first time we won't hold as long, and when your legs start to fatigue, I'll show you how to come out of this pose. So when you decide it's time to come out, lean forward, place your hands on the wall, use your hands to help lift the hips, slide the hips up the wall. With your hands, pull the flesh of the buttocks up higher, and then with the legs straight, lean into a forward bend. Having worked the quadriceps, you may notice that the hamstrings are a little bit less reticent to stretch. Taking a few more breaths as you lean into a nice deep hamstring stretch. We're going to repeat this 2 more times, so we're holding a little bit longer. When you're ready, keep your feet where they are, bend the knees, slide your hips down the wall, flatten your back into the wall, into kind of a modified chair pose. If you want to come back to the Ujjayi breath, that provides a nice target for your mind. If you get into trouble and you need to come out early, place your hands on the wall, lean forward, use your hands to help yourself come back up. Come up at any point. If you're doing okay, hold here a little longer. We want to work to a mild fatigue, but not exhaustion. When you're ready to come up, place your hands on the wall, slide your hips up, and then hang into a second forward bend. Try to work the sit bones higher up the wall by using your hands to lift the flesh as you lean into the hamstrings. Again, notice how it feels. When you're ready, come back up. And we'll do one final repetition. Bending the knees. If you need to, reposition your feet. If you're getting too tired, walk your feet in closer to the wall. We want to keep the thighs slightly higher than the knees. Again, come back to the sound of your breath. Finding the space between hearing and not hearing. Place your attention on that. When you're ready to come up, use your hands. Draw the flesh up the wall. Lean into your forward bend. Four or 5 more breaths. Stretching the exhale. And then coming back upright. Turning around to face the wall. And we'll work with tree pose. Find a drishti, choose a point on the wall, and use that point to hold your focus. Spread the toes on the left foot, float the right foot up to the calf or bring the heel up to the groin. Try to take the knee back, float the arms overhead. If you get a little bit wobbly, take your arms out horizontal. If you're struggling with balance, just touch the wall with your fingertips to steady yourself. We'll be doing this a few times. So coming out on your own, shift your weight to the opposite side, flare the toes, pick your drishti, hold on to the wall with your eyes, and then lifting the opposite leg. You can either place the foot on your calf or bring it up to the groin. Float the arms overhead. Take a breath or two. And coming back to Tadasana. Next, we'll work with Dancer. Hold on to the wall with both hands. Stand close enough to the wall that you don't have to lean forward to reach it. Lift your right foot and with your right hand grab the outside of the ankle or externally rotate your shoulder and grab the inside of the foot. With one hand, steady yourself, and with the foot that you're holding on to, begin to kick away with the foot and use that to pull back on your shoulder. If you decide you want to incorporate balance, float the left hand off the wall. And if you want to focus on the pose itself, just keep your left hand on the wall so you can really work the mechanics of the pose. When you're ready, switch sides. Hold on to the wall with your right fingertips, and with your left hand, grab the outside of the foot or externally rotate the arm and grab the inside of the foot. Kick with the left leg a few times. Use that action to pull back on the left shoulder to open the shoulder and the chest. And either rest your fingertips on the wall and focus on the alignment and physical nature of the pose, or lift your hands free and focus on balance. Take a breath or two, and then coming back down. Next, we'll open up the shoulders. Place both hands on the wall, a little higher than your head, and then walk your feet back and sink your chest through. Almost as if you were doing downward facing dog, but with your hands on the wall. Sink your chest towards the floor. Float the shoulder blades towards the ceiling. Broaden the upper back, hollow the inner armpits, and then spiral through the knuckle of the index finger. Push the knuckle of the index fingers into the wall. Knees can be bent slightly, and then leaning into just to where you get a healthy, pleasant stretching. When you're ready, step out. Now this time we're going to work on balance again, standing a little closer to the wall. Spread the toes on the right foot. And if you'll take a moment and just watch, there's a tendency in balancing poses for the foot to be wobbling, the arch collapsing and rolling out and in. And you're going to hold onto the wall with both hands and try and bring the foot to absolute stillness. So you notice the toes are twitching and the tendons are jumping, and that's how most people balance when they're practicing yoga. So I want you to see if you can bring your supporting foot to absolute stillness. So let's give this a try. On the right foot, spread the toes, shift your weight to the right, lift the left foot, and then with your fingertips of both hands, touch the wall lightly. Now, close your eyes. If you feel the right foot or the right ankle wobbling, hold on to the wall with both hands. If you feel steady, you can use less support. At the first hint of wobbling, steady yourself with the wall. The first hint of stability, float free. Second side. Spread the toes on the left foot, lift the right foot, and then with both hands, touching the wall lightly, steady yourself, close your eyes. Try to bring your left ankle and foot to absolute stillness with your eyes closed. If you feel perfectly steady, use less support on the wall, using just 2 fingertips or 1 fingertip. If you start to feel wobbly, use the wall more. Keep the left ankle absolutely perfectly still with the eyes closed. And then coming back to Tadasana. Next, we'll work with a hamstring stretch. You'll need a little bit of padding for the back knee, so a folded blanket may be sufficient. And your foot is going to go up the wall, and we'll be taking our left foot up the wall, the knee on the ground at the corner of the wall and the floor. If you need more support, if your kneecap bothers you, roll up your blanket from either side so there's a hollow between the 2 rolls, and put your kneecap inside that hollow space. The closer your knee to the wall, the more intense this pose will be. The further your knee from the wall, the easier. Now you'll take your right foot out to the side and then slowly begin to walk it around, toe to heel. If you start to pick up a stretch, move your knee further from the wall and try again. We want to get into our lunge position here without any stretch in the left quadricep. Now we're going to apply this same principle to stretching. Ask yourself, can you feel any sensation in the left quadricep, a stretching sensation? If the answer is no, lean in slightly. If the answer is yes, back away slightly. And look for the space where the answer is, I'm not sure. And stay there for 5 or 6 breaths. Now, even though you're staying at a very delicate level, you can also play. You can lean a little left or a little right. You can undulate with the hips. To start with, think of this almost as meditation, finding that most subtle, delicate sensation and then backing away until you aren't sure if you feel it or not. The moment you realize you know the answer to that question, lean in or back away until you regain uncertainty. This is a good way to enter any stretch in order to calm the muscles. If the muscles feel like they're beginning to relax and to trust you, you can begin to lean in a little more deeply. Breathe deep, stretch the exhale. Sometimes all the difference is a perfect exhale to calm muscles. Experiment, roll the hips left or right, walk your hands to the left or the right, lean one way or the other. You can let the right knee flare out to the side, opening up a stretch and moving some of the stretch into the right outer thigh, hips or buttocks, as well as the left quadricep. Focus on the sensations and move those sensations through the body. And then placing both hands on your thigh. If you've already had enough stretch, just come down to Child's Pose. And if you're ready for just a little bit extra stretch, place your hands on your thigh, lift up, arch into a slight back bend, sink your hips forward and down. Breathe into this, especially breathing into the left lower area of the lungs, into the lower left abdomen. Imagine that you could breathe into the psoas muscle in the left leg. 3 or 4 more breaths. This is one of the most important muscles to stretch and one of the hardest. Ask yourself, are you actually enjoying stretching this muscle? If the answer is no, second question is it because you're in too deep or too shallow? 9 times out of 10, it'll be because you went in too far too quickly. So learn from those mistakes so that when we go to the second side, you can do better. When you're ready, walk the right foot to the right and then back behind you. Come back down to your hands and knees. And then lift the right leg. Place the foot up higher on the wall. Place your knee on the padding. Take your left foot out to the side and then walk it toe to heel around in front of you into a lunge. The right quadricep is going to be, for most people, very twitchy. So back away, back away, back away, until you aren't sure if you feel any stretch or not. Employing the same principle. Adjusting until you aren't sure if you're feeling anything or not. Take a few breaths. Use your exhale to calm the right thigh. And then, if and when you feel those muscles relaxing and releasing, begin to play. Stay at a very gentle stretch as you lean to the left or to the right. Or take the knee out to the side. If it starts to feel good, you're welcome to lean in to a deeper stretch. You can even come down onto your elbows or shift your hips to the left or right. Stretching the exhale into a sigh. And then we'll be coming into a more upright position in a few moments. If you've already had enough of a stretch, come into Child's Pose. And if you are ready for a bigger stretch, place your hands on your thigh and begin lifting the ribs up. Try and draw the abdomen back and lift the chest up, roll the shoulders back, sink the hips forward and down. Avoid any temptation to force the pose. Make sure that you actually are creating sensations that are pleasurable. Trust the wisdom of the body to know the difference between strain and stretch. Use your exhale. Bringing your hands back to the floor. Take a few more breaths just to explore leaning left or right, or dropping to an elbow. When you're finished, walk your left foot out to the side and back, and then coming away from the wall just enough that you can come into an extended child's pose. Walk the hands forward, sink the hips back, knees wider than the ribs. Find a position that feels comfortable, that you can relax and let go, and not have to strain or protect anything. And then breathe in, especially to the back of the body. Upper back, mid back, low back, and then into the belly. Coming back up to your hands and knees now, starting off with table. And then coming down onto your stomach for Cobra. Hands planted on the floor, well behind the shoulders. Shrug the shoulders, lift the shoulders, roll the shoulders back. Press the tops of the feet down for Cobra. Now, as you lift up, come up just part way, and then breathe. Give yourself permission to come into the pose a little more slowly than normal, and to really try to feel the pose. Then begin, if it feels good, to work a little bit more strongly. Rolling the shoulders back, thrusting the chest forward, pressing down with the feet. Downward facing dog when you're ready. Alternate legs, bend one knee, reach the opposite heel towards the floor. And then straighten both legs if you're able to. If the hamstrings are still tight, keep both knees bent slightly. Pull the chest through towards your feet. Reach the sit bones away. Spiral the arms, spiral the legs. Breathe into downward facing dog. And then bringing your knees to the floor, coming back down for a second Cobra. This will be our last work for the back muscles. Again, plant the hands, shrug the shoulders, lift the shoulders, roll the shoulder blades together and down the back. Reach the chest forward. And then breathing in to the pose. Letting the breath be deliberate and full. Downward facing dog. Play with the pose for a few breaths, working out any kinks. And then gradually settling into the pose a little more deeply and begin to work the pose. Spiral the arms, spiral the legs, hollow the abdomen, hollow the inner armpits, broaden the upper back. Pigeon pose when you're ready to slow down. Bring the right knee through, set it on the floor, walk the left leg back. Now, adjust so you have a very delicate stretch by moving your left leg forward and to the left until you aren't sure if you have any stretch at all. Then take a breath or two, and then adjust your pose until you find that uncertainty. Take another breath or two, giving the body time to feel safe, time to relax. And if you feel the muscles beginning to release, to soften, and it feels good, Then begin to work your way a little deeper into the stretch. Breathing deep, stretching the exhalation. 5 or 10 breaths. Now the question becomes, do you have a perfect stretch? Or are you in just a tiny bit too shallow or a tiny bit too deep? Keep asking that question and then adjusting. And with each exhale, allowing yourself to sink deeper into the stretch. Downward facing dog. We won't hold as long. 2 or 3 breaths. This time leading with the left leg. Bring the left knee forward, set it on the floor, walk the right leg back. Adjust until you find a delicate stretch, and then back off until it disappears, and then find the space in between. Take a few breaths here. As soon as you reach certainty, whether you do feel the stretch or don't feel the stretch, adjust until once again you aren't sure. By paying attention, which this forces you to do, the body feels seen and understood. And when that happens, it begins to trust you. Knowing that you're paying attention, it begins to drop defense mechanisms. And as that happens, begin to work your way deeper into the stretch. Now the goal shifts to becoming the goal of creating the most pleasant, healthy sensations. Asking yourself if you are in a little too shallow or in a little too deep, and then adjusting accordingly. Five or 6 more breaths. Stretch the exhale. And then pushing back into one last downward facing dog. Walking your hands in towards your feet, standing forward bent. Buckle the knees as you roll up. And we're going to use the wall again now. And this time for half handstand. Feel free to keep your feet on the floor or just lift one foot. So don't go past your comfort zone psychologically or physically. With your heels against the wall, position your hands slightly in front of the shoulders. Spread the fingers wide, shoulder width apart. Tuck the toes, down dog, and then the trick here is to keep your chest as close to the wall as you can and keep the knees bent. Place one foot on the wall and then see if you can lift the other foot. Now, for more advanced pose, you straighten the legs, but only if you're confident in this particular position. If you aren't sure, keep your knees bent. Save enough strength to come down. If you want to stay there longer, you can, but you want to have enough strength to come down safely and comfortably. Extended child's pose. Take a few breaths. Spinal twist. Either bring both knees or just your right knee into your chest, roll to the right, turn the upper body to the left, and then pendiculate play. We aren't going to hold long. Just take a few breaths. Trying to create some pleasant, safe, healthy sensations as you twist. And then switch sides, roll the legs to the left, turn the upper body to the right. Once again, intuitively moving into a twist that feels right to you. Couple more breaths on the second side. Next, we'll be doing a shoulder stand using the wall. The hardest part about this is getting your hips close enough to the wall. So if you aren't sure how to do this, you might watch me first and then follow along. Sit as if you're doing Dandasana, sideways to the wall, and then roll over. Put your bottom hip flush with the wall, and then roll back onto your back. Have a blanket handy for Shavasana. Now with your feet, you can press your feet into the wall and then lift your hips just a few inches and you can bring the blanket under your hips and rest. For those of you that want to work a little bit more, remember the contraindications for inversions. If you're on your period, pregnant, had a hernia, stomach ulcers, glaucoma, all good reasons to keep your hips on the blanket or on the floor. For those of you that want to, though, you can use your legs to push your hips up and away from the wall into a half shoulder stand. Keep the back of the neck long. Make sure that your neck feels safe. Rolling back down to the floor. And take a breath or two here. Now we'll be staying in this position for Shavasana. If you prefer to push away and lay flat on the floor, that's fine. The knees can be bent. You can spread the legs wide. You can straighten the legs up the wall. The main consideration is comfort. Can you find a position that allows you to relax more fully, more deeply? Coming back to the Ujjayi breath and finding the space between hearing and not hearing. And as you listen for the sound of the breath, relax your face, your jaws, your lips, your tongue, your mouth. Fingers, hands, arms, and shoulders. Feet, ankles, calves, knees, and thighs. Loosening hips, relaxing the buttocks. Low back, the belly, the kidneys, the ribs.
the chest, the shoulder, the back of the neck, and soften the throat. The jaws, the lips, the tongue, the mouth, and especially the eyeballs, the space behind the eyeballs. The eyelids, the eyebrow, the forehead, the temples soft and hollow, the scalp, and the crown. If your mind wanders, come back to the uncertainty of the sound of your breathing. And slowly breathe a little deeper. Float the arms overhead. Bend the knees. Press the small of your back into the floor as you stretch through the shoulders side to side. Let the knees roll left as you stretch to the right and switch sides. Roll to one side. Coming back up to a comfortable seated position.
I'd like to thank you for joining me for today's practice and invite you to play with these two ideas on your own. The one idea using a wall as a prop, and you can do all kinds of things. We just did a few examples of how you can use your wall as a drishti, as support for balance poses, as leverage for shoulder opening poses, or to help with inversions, whether a shoulder stand or with a different form of Shavasana, legs up to the wall. Okay? So the other idea is this idea of uncertainty and allowing yourself to be comfortable in that space. Now, there are two ways or two types of uncertainty. So if I ask someone that is a microbiologist who is studying something, and I ask them a question about something they're actually studying, and they say, "We don't know." But that uncertainty isn't a uncertainty because they don't care. They care deeply and they don't know, which is very different from asking someone playing a video game the same question, and they say, "I don't know," without even thinking about it because they don't care. So the uncertainty is an uncertainty about something you deeply care about, and resisting the impulse to jump from certainty to certainty prematurely. Okay? The moment you do, you've shut off the dialogue. And in yoga, the whole point of yoga is the dialogue. It's not about getting to a certain place. It's about the dialogue along the way, the journey. So this idea of in any pose, whether it is strengthening a muscle, stretching a muscle, whether it's pranayama, is to find a question that you can ask yourself that then becomes the measure by which you adjust, backing off or coming deeper, until you find a space where you aren't sure what the answer is. Not because you don't care, but because you're working at such a subtle level now that you have to pay attention. And over time, you become better and better at paying attention, and as you do that, you have to become even more subtle in your practice to find that place of uncertainty. As you get better at this technique, you'll find that you're able to engage with your yoga practice at a much deeper level and sustain that awareness over longer periods of time. And I hope that you play with this idea not just with your yoga practice, but in other areas of your life. Hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you and everyone you love are all doing well with the social isolation, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bring your hands together over the heart. Namaste.